Paul Forstein.
Here.
Paul Forstein is here. Babak Ruskafard.
Here.
Babak Ruskafard is here. Ryan Schumacher.
Here.
Ryan Schumacher is here. Maggie McCall. Maggie McCall is absent. Mark Kobos.
Here.
Mark Kobos is here. And Chair with a member of the regular board absent. Would you like to appoint Ryan Schumacher as a voting member this evening?
Yes, we would.
And with 5 members present, we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. So first tonight, I'd like to see if we can get approval of the minutes for February 21st meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes as provided.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. At this time, we're going to ask that if there's any public comment that is not on the agenda tonight, if you can have this time to come forward and talk about whatever you'd like that's not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move forward with the public hearing for Missoula Development Park wayfinding signs. Lauren, if you can give us a staff report.
Lauren Miller, Planner, Community and Planning Services. The request is to provide notice and allow the public to comment through a public forum on Missoula County's wayfinding monument signs, which will vary from Missoula County zoning regulations, section 6.08, part E, number 3B4, which states the total signage allowance for a directional sign is 50 square feet. One directional sign may be located at each access point. The signs that they're proposing measure approximately 55.25 square feet. There will be a total of 4 signs, 3 directional, indicating the entrances of the development park. One will be a sign indicating the location of Midland Park. Here's a map provided by the applicant to show the approximate location of each sign. One will be on the corner of Airway Boulevard and West Harrier near the Dino's gas station. The other at the intersection of Airway Boulevard and West Broadway near the Lithia Chrysler Jeep. One on the intersection of Kendrick Place and Expressway. And then the park sign, like I said, at the entrance of Midland Park on the corner of Alloy South and Expressway. The sign locations are zoned in the Missoula Development Park special zoning designation. The surrounding parcels are a mix of CI1 and CP1 zoning. The proposal is for Missoula County Development Park to construct the 3 monument wayfinding signs and 1 park sign at the Missoula Development Park. The wayfinding signs will be placed on private property in locations approved by Missoula County Public Works. The monument signs were designed to follow the design standards set by a wayfinding report prepared by MERJE in partnership with the City of Missoula. And here's a couple photos that I've added of the sign locations. The top photo is a picture of Midland Park, the bottom, the one in front of the gas station. Here's the other 2, the one on the top obviously on Kendrick Place and the bottom one by the Chrysler Jeep of Missoula. Here's some potential sign designs that were submitted by the applicant to give an idea of what the signs are going to look like. Notice was sent to agencies and adjacent property owners. Public Works noted that before the placement of the signs, specific locations will need to be approved. The signs must be out of the clear zone, and the sign shall not create any obstruction within the site triangles. Dean, who owns Dino's gas station, did note that he did not want the signs blocking any of his gas station signs, and I had the applicant follow up with him. No other comments or concerns were noted. As a public agency, Missoula County is allowed to vary from zoning resolution. The Board of Adjustment is unable to approve, conditionally approve, or deny the proposal. And this concludes my staff report.
Okay, thank you very much. At this time, we would ask if there's any public testimony in regards to this public hearing that they can step forward at this time. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on the wayfinding monument signs for Missoula County. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, if we can talk or get a staff report for the Mullen Road storage units, Lauren. Give us a staff report.
Once again, Lauren Miller, Planning, Community and Planning Services. The request we're looking at today is by Toby McClure Morrison, Maryland Inc. on behalf of Access Storage LLC for 3 different variance requests from Missoula County zoning regulation or zoning C, C1 neighborhood commercial. Section 2.15B of Missoula County zoning regulation requires a minimum front setback of 25 feet. The applicant today is requesting a variance of 15 feet to reduce the setback to 10 feet along Ptarmigan Drive. The second variance request from section 2.15B of Missoula County zoning regulation sets a maximum floor area of 2,500 square feet per establishment. The applicant is requesting a variance from the maximum square footage requirement to include additional 16,320 square feet. The third variance request from section 3.05A2 requires that all non-residential uses adjacent to or directly across the street from a residential district shall provide a visual buffer 5 feet wide along the perimeter of lot lines adjacent to residential areas planned under an approved overall development plan, residential districts, or existing residential areas. The applicant is requesting a variance from that 5-foot visual buffer. The property we're looking at today is located along Mullen Road across from the Ranch Club Golf Course. The parcels are approximately a total of 1.12 acres combined and are surrounded by a mix of residential and commercial uses. Here's a picture of the existing site today. It's currently vacant and has been since the early 60s. It's currently sort of used as just a dumping site for grass clippings. There's not a lot of vegetation on the site. The property is also sloped slightly, and there's a 15-foot utility easement and a 20-foot common area running to the south of the property. Here's a site plan that we were received from the applicant. It shows 3 mini storage warehouses with approaches from both Mullen Road and Ptarmigan Drive. Ptarmigan Drive is considered a secondary frontage to Mullen Road. Here's a visual showing the setback variance request. The parcels are a unique rectangular shape. With the current zoning setbacks, the buildable space is very limited. The property is approximately 150 feet in depth. With a 25-foot setback, the mini warehouse along Ptarmigan Drive would be set back a total of 64 feet from the center line, whereas the storage unit that's just adjacent to the property is only 46 feet from the center line. Granting that 10-foot setback, the mini warehouse will then be only 49 feet from the center line of Ptarmigan Drive. Granting the setback variance will allow for more developable space and an actual storage unit building versus the possibility for an area to store outdoor recreational vehicles. This next graphic shows for the second variance request of the maximum building area. The lot is shown in comparison with the existing storage unit facility next door, which was granted a similar variance request in 1999 to build 4 storage unit buildings around the same size. The land use designates these parcels as 4 dwelling units per acre. The CC1 commercial zoning allows for mini warehouses as a conditional use. However, having this maximum building area of only 2,500 square feet does not make a lot of sense for allowing this sort of development to occur, even though it's permitted within the zoning district. And this is the third variance request. This shows the landscaping plan submitted by the applicant. And like I said, the third variance request is for that 5-foot landscape buffer. And as discussed earlier, the property is sloped slightly. The mini warehouse that's proposed would sit approximately 4 feet above the utility and common area easement to the south. This landscaping plan shows trees planted along Mullen Road and Ptarmigan Drive, and some to the south along the hillside there. A full landscape plan will need to be submitted per zoning requirements. That 15-foot utility easement running south of the property does need to remain free of any sort of obstructions. Without the landscape buffer, this would lead to 360 linear feet of double fence, creating problems for any sort of sewer access. This graphic here gives you a little bit of a better idea of that slope issue. So like I said, the proposed mini warehouse would sit 4 feet above the utility and common area to the south. Due to the elevation change, the 5-foot high landscape buffer would be approximately 3 feet lower than the finished floor of the new buildings, essentially not giving any sort of buffer to the buildings for the residential neighbors, but only a buffer from the landscaping that will be placed on the hillside. Here's a couple photos to get an idea of the current state of the lot. Like I said, kind of just a dumping ground for stuff. Kind of gives you a better idea of the slope that's on the lot. Notice was sent to public agencies and residents. Residents in 300 feet of the site. We did not receive any comments back from residents. As I stated earlier, Parks, Trails, and Open Lands did say that a full landscaping plan will need to be submitted per zoning requirements. And based on the factors that I presented and those within the staff report, staff is recommending approval of all 3 variances, subject to the conditions listed above. And this concludes my staff report.
Okay, thank you. At this time, do we have anyone that wishes to speak as a proponent for this variance at this time? Any proponents need to speak? Someone that is in favor of the variance that is being requested? Okay. Well, you'll have a chance here in just a minute. Okay. Okay. Seeing none, is there any opponents or someone that wishes to speak against the variance? Can you please come up to the podium, ma'am? And if you could let us know who you are and maybe spell your last name so that they, for the public record, so we understand who you are. That would be great. Thank you.
Do I have to keep my finger on it? No, is it green? Yes. My name is Susan Henson. We live right behind the proposed storage units. I just wanted to mention that two of the houses on the lower elevation lots have trouble with flooding. And so when you do the planning, that needs to be make sure that there's good drainage up there, because they've had to redo their basement a couple times. We've lived there for 40 years. And that's been flooded 3 times in the house next to us on the lower level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I think, are you guys the ones doing it? I think they told us there was going to be 25 feet between our property line and the back of their storage units. Is that correct? So you have access to the sewer? Yeah, then I don't have a problem. I thought they were going to build right up on our fence, but they're not.
Okay,
Okay. Do you want me to shut this off?
please. So is there any other public testimony? Would you like to address the spacing and the amount of room that will be there for the sewer line? And my assumption is that you're Toby and, okay. Thank you.
Toby McClue with Morrison Merrily, representing Access Storage. And we put together an exhibit that was kind of looking at the distance we had based on the homes. We had kind of 5 homes that border the property to the south. And we were looking at the setback requirements, plus there's also an elevation difference that's pretty substantial from Mullen Road to some of the lower lots. Ptarmigan drops pretty substantially as you head south. In order to hold the buildings up, maintain MDA or MDT approach requirements for their slope and accessibility, we couldn't push the buildings down too far. And that also, because of slope constraints, required us to keep the buildings pushed as far north as we could for Mullen Road, or to accommodate the slope basically. And so they're kind of shoved to the north. And so doing that basically required additional run on our slope to make them serviceable, so that we could maintain the slopes and vegetation. And you can see in the exhibit that a lot of the homes, are, I think the shortest distance to any home from the back is 75 feet, I believe. And they have a 25-foot setback off of those. So most of the activity is located internal to the structure. And so there will be nothing moving, I guess, between the storage units and the homes. It'll just be a landscaped area. And Access Storage is also does landscaping. They're a local firm in town as well that kind of a 2-part piece, but they'll be maintaining. They have all their commercial grade lawn mowing and all that stuff. So realistically, the overall part will resemble more of a park when it's said and done. And then as far as storm drainage goes, you can't see it in this picture very well, but there is a small linear ditch / pond that runs the whole length that will be collecting all the water from around the site and off the buildings and then directing it. So we're going to control where that water goes and keep it away from the homes.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you being able to answer those questions. So is there any other public testimony in regard to this variance? Seeing none, we'll close this and close the hearing at this time and see if there's any questions from the board members here. So anybody have any questions?
I had one question for the proponent, for Toby. Do you mind going back? Just keep some more. Sorry, that one right there. It's a little, I think that's the one. Yeah, it's a little hard to see, but I just wanted to, when I'm looking at this exhibit and you show the 60, for Ptarmigan Drive, you have the 60-foot right-of-way. It looks like the right-of-way is not, that the center line is not, it's not, the 60-foot right-of-way is not 30 feet on either side of the center line. Is that correct, or is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
The road wasn't built centered within the existing road right away, and I'm not 100% sure why that is the case, but yeah, it's shifted in that right away.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the road was, like you said, not built on the center line and was shifted, or if that was. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any more questions for Toby? Okay, thanks, Toby. Okay, so regarding this one, I had a question in the beginning about this variance regarding the landscape buffer. After going to the site and looking at the elevations that you provided, it is clear that it would provide little buffering of any of the buildings, so especially with the grade change. So that was my main one, and after visiting the site, it was really apparent that that was the case. So that was my only major question that I had, but thank you.
Actually, I have one other question too. On the buffer, I was a little confused when I read it. So on the south side of the building, will those be kind of like your typical storage unit? Will those be access bays, or will that be a solid wall on the?
On the south side of the building that is facing the existing residence, that'll just be a solid wall. There won't be any access or any traffic or any movement. Basically, it'll just be grass up to the back of the building. There'll be landscaped. We'll meet the landscape requirements, and most of it'll just be a rock and grass, kind of a park area.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly. Thanks.
Good. Okay. All right, thanks, Toby. Appreciate it. So any other discussion on this recommended, the three, I guess, recommended variances for the 25 yards, or 25-foot front yard setback, the 2,500 square foot maximum floor area, and the 5-foot high landscape buffer. So,
I'll make a motion that the Board of Adjustments approve the variance from the county zoning regulations, Section 215B, and allow a 15-foot variance to the front yard setback along Ptarmigan Drive, creating a setback of 10 feet along the secondary frontage. I move that the Board of Adjustment approve the variance from the county zoning board, zoning regulations, Section 2.15B, to exceed the maximum building area of 2,500 square feet to allow a total of 18,820 square feet. I move that the Board of Adjustments approve the variance from the county zoning regulations, Section 3.05A.2, and eliminate the 5-foot high buffer adjacent to residential areas. The property is legally described as Block 8 of Lots 3 and 2 of Elmar Estates, Phase 1, and is zoned C-CI. This approval is based on the findings of facts and conditions, or excuse me, findings of facts and conclusions of law found in the staff report and the public testimony, and is subject to the following conditions. And I'll read those conditions. Staff's recommended conditions are: 1, the storage units built must be in substantial compliance with the site plan as submitted, and 2, all other necessary permits administered by agencies other than the Community and Planning Services shall be obtained by Access Storage, Inc. These permits may include, but are not limited to, building, electrical, mechanical, approach, and sanitation permits.
thank you, Paul. Do you have a second of the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, Jerry's seconded. Having a motion and a second, do we have any other discussion? I do have one point of order. There's been some discussion in the past about us voting on these as a separate item or as a group. Is there any been anything established as far as which way that is correct? Or the more correct way to deal with it? That's what I was assuming. I just wanted to make sure that if we just vote on them in one shot, as long as there's no dissent, that we can do that. So, all right. Well, seeing no more discussion, well, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Jerry Ford,
Yes.
Paul Forstein,
Yes.
Babak Rutherford,
Yes.
Ryan Schumacher,
Yes.
Mark Kobos.
Yes.
With all ayes, the motion passes.
All right. Thank you very much. The variance is approved. So now we'll go through our rest of our agenda here. Do we have any old business that we need to cover, Jamie?
Got one more item.
One more?
C.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Wait.
That is old business. We
Right?
started it last go-round.
Yeah.
The bylaw amendment. Sorry, Jamie.
You're good.
I'm just anxious to get outside.
I don't blame you.
So last week when we met, or last time when we met, we talked about these bylaws being changed, and there was a lot of good discussion. What I thought we would do tonight would be to go through these. Jamie's got a bunch of screenshots of some of the changes, and if everyone's in agreement, we'll go ahead and move forward on getting a new revised set of these documents out to everyone in the near future. And then at the next appointed meeting, then we would want to have that consolidation and try and make a recommendation for approval to the commission at that time. So if possible, what I'd like to do tonight is just go through these page by page, item by item. Some of the items we saw that folks said, hey, we need to discuss this more. You'll have an opportunity to do that at that time, and then we'll just kind of just see if we can go through it in general. So Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So we'll just, as Mark said, go article by article. First ones I have up are Article 1 and Article 2. Babbitt, I definitely appreciate the underlined strikeout comments. I just used your document and built off of it, so thank you. So in Article 1, Babbitt had commented that it was just unclear about what the amendments were to. So I added to the bylaws to that first, or I guess second sentence in Article 1, based on his comments. And I did not have any additional changes in Article 2. Any other thoughts? Comments? Good. Okay. In Article 3, again, just minor changes here. Added the word zoning in front of regulations just to be consistent throughout the document. So that was all the only change here. Then I'll move on to continued section of Article 3. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that was the only change I had in Article 3. Article 4. Little confusing there. And so we reworded number 5. So it would read, authorize a variance from the county zoning regulations if the variance is found to not be contrary to the public interest and where owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provisions of the regulations will not result in an unnecessary hardship. The spirit of the zoning regulations shall be observed and substantial justice done. So that's one of the powers and duties that the board has.
I guess I have one comment there.
Yep.
If we're going to be consistent, I guess, in the 1, 2, 3, fourth line where you say regulations, I guess zoning regulations, since that's how
Okay.
what we
Yep.
use throughout the document.
Okay. This next article, Article 5, is on membership. Babbitt again had a question regarding if a public hearing was necessary if a commissioner were to remove a member from a term. I did not find that a hearing was required, so I proposed just striking that requirement. Any objections? Good, okay. With regards to the term limits, as proposed, we had members may serve no more than 4 consecutive 2-year terms. Paul suggested 6 consecutive 2-year terms, and Andy suggested just removing the term limit altogether. So I thought we could have additional discussion about that. Thoughts? Jerry, I know you've been on the board for quite some time. If you have any insight to that, that would be great. The only. Okay.
Pretty, oh, sorry. I think you got it pretty well covered.
Okay. And the only reason we're considering term limits is most of the boards in the county have a term limit, so just.
What are some of those other term limits, Jamie?
Well, this I pulled from planning board specifically, so they are 4 consecutive 2-year terms. So,
And the planning board meets every other week, and they, so I can imagine.
yeah.
I mean, this sometimes I don't know how often we meet regularly, but I think it's maybe 4 to 5 times. And so my thought was maybe just extend it out a little further.
Sure.
I don't think commissioners have term limits. We're appointed by the commissioners, and so if they at any point have any reason not to appoint us, my thought was, hey, that, maybe if there's a need for it, then maybe put it out a little further than 8 years. So that was my thought. Andy's thought, hey, why would there be any? That's the comment I read from Andy. And so, not opposed to them, but I thought maybe 12 years instead of 8 was my suggestion.
Okay.
I'm not opposed. Oh, were you going to say something? I'm not opposed either, and I think Paul's comments make a lot of sense in terms of how frequently we meet. I guess one question I had just for other members of the board, and I don't know if I have a heart, strong feeling about this either way, but right now, I guess if it's either 8 years or potentially 12 years, I don't know how people here would feel about the following, or if any other boards have something like, instead of just 12 years and then you're ineligible forever, if it's something like, in a 15-year period, you can't serve more than 12 years or some weird math like that, so that, yes, if you've been on the board 12 years in a row, then, you got to sit out for a certain period of time. But then, I mean, I don't know if that situation would even come up. Just curious, what people think, and maybe Jerry, who's been on the board, or staff, who have some experience with other boards, is that, I just don't know how hard it is also to, for the commissioners to fill the vacancies when they do arise. So, if we do this in 12 years down the road, we have people who are still interested. If, Paul sits out a year or two, can he get back on, or is he, ineligible for life? I just,
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how many people are clamoring to be on the board, but it doesn't seem like the most people.
And I do know other boards do have, like a break, which I think some of them are just a year. So if you term out, you can be off the board for a year and then you're eligible to rejoin.
I think
So that
that
is something that's an option.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because I think the reason for the term limits is to get fresh perspective. And so that'll allow for someone new to come into the board. And then if there's no openings, there's no openings. But when there is one, the board member that may have served 12 years in a row and waited 2 years out can interview alongside with other people.
Sure. I think that's a good point. I will admit this is probably one of the harder boards for us to fill. But I think that Ryan has a very good point.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I guess with the lack of meetings sometimes for months on end, at times, it's hard to keep a group engaged in this and moving forward. So I think I would be a proponent towards going even to a 6 instead of 4-year, and then or at least having, if we aren't going to do that, then at least have an accommodation after the 8-year term to be able to come back after a period of time to be set. So I think what we want to do on this item then is maybe have the folks that are involved here, maybe make a proposal on what they think is a fair way to do that. I'm sure there's some other boards that have bylaws that we can look at, and I think I have a couple that I can look at that are similar to this, and take a look at how they worded it and how they termed it out. So let's go ahead and do that on that item, and then we'll just get your comments back to Jamie. We'll talk about it when we get done, when we see how many comments we have on that we want to
Yep.
change, of setting a timeline of saying, hey, let's have it done by this date, and then Jamie can again reconcile those and bring them together, and we can get this hopefully before the next meeting back with some agreement and get it finished up. So, okay, go ahead then, Jamie.
Moving on. Still in Article 5 here. With regards to absences for 3 consecutive meetings, suggestion to change that from calendar year to a 12-year or a 12-month period, or an absent for more than 35% versus what we had at 30%. And I think, again, just considering how many meetings we have, Paul also commented, that we only send out the agenda a week prior to the meeting. So sometimes you guys don't know your schedule. So
No, I'm in favor of this change. In my opinion, I think it seems reasonable. You wouldn't have to miss, but on some years, very few meetings, and you would be at that point eligible for removal. So, so I think that's fine unless you guys feel differently.
okay.
if you get sent someplace on some type of detail, that a lot of times goes more than 90 days if you happen to have three of them in a row. They're, I don't know really how you cover that, but
Sure.
Well, it looks like the commissioners, I mean, that's a good point, right? But the commissioners, it's not an automatic thing. It says the commissioners may consider, and then I suppose if that's a situation where someone's got a temporary job assignment out of state or something like that, he or she can, explain to the commissioners, they weren't just absent because they were, hanging out at, the bar down the street or something like that, I don't know. So,
I just had that, so
We've had some members come on that have maybe only attended one, and maybe this would be an option for removing them and getting somebody else on the board to be interested. I feel like there's been a couple of those.
Yeah, and I think in the past, we've had a few situations where we we've had some, not very many, but a couple where we didn't have a quorum and we couldn't even hold a meeting. We also had some where we had the minimums barely. I mean, meeting after meeting after meeting. And I
Yeah.
think that was what this is about, is if people sign up and say they'll do this and then you can never get a quorum here to address the public need for the variance, it's, at that point, the board would probably have to take action, in my opinion, and go to the commissioners and say, hey, we have to get some assistance here because we were not being able to get our work done. But I think that's kind of more on us to expedite that or push it if we think that there's a situation, in my opinion. But I think we can live with 35, or at least some sort of a trigger. We probably need to have one. We need to have a trigger so that we can, get change to be happening, with an appointment of some additional folks or whatever we need to do.
You okay with that, Jerry? Additional thoughts? You okay with that? Additional thoughts? It's not an absolute that you're out of here. It's just a possible.
And just let us know when you're on your next detail. Next time they're shipping you off.
he's in Helen all the time now, so I don't know.
Question here, this is Article 6 regarding officers. The question, as I read this section and the definition of chair, there doesn't seem to be anything to require that the chair or vice chair be elected from one of the 5 members of the board. Seems fairly clear, or at least it's implied that the chair and vice chair selected from among the members, but there doesn't seem to be any absolute requirement. At least with our planning world, if it's a shall, it's different than a may. So shall is a required, whereas may is possible. So when we have board members shall elect a chair who shall serve a term of 1 year, same with vice chair. I felt that was,
I guess my comment was more that does he or she have to come from the board? The way I read it is, yes, we have to elect the chair, but, if we want to, I don't know,
I see.
that, we want to select someone waiting for the bus over there as our
Right.
chair. I'm not, I'm not, but I think it's clear that we would select, but that's what, and then you go back to the definition, it just says the chair is basically all the definition of chair is.
Okay.
Maybe it doesn't need clarity. I've just, if people think it's clear, then that's fine. I just, if some,
Probably resolve it with just redefining the definition of chair and vice chair and have that definition reflect that they're members of the board, they've been appointed, or,
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
that way, we can leave this as is and just add a little to the definition.
Add a little
yeah.
to the definition.
Yeah, just,
That
I
makes
think
sense. Okay.
that would cover it. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Okay. I didn't skip a page here. Hold on. Okay. Question regarding duties of the chair. The chair may enter into discussions of matter before the board. Question was, what does enter into discussions? Simply means that the chair has a voice. They can do more than just run the meeting. You can also participate in the discussion. But if we need further clarification, I'm open to suggestions.
Is that the common language that, discussions is?
Yeah.
And it would say you can't, if there's some, that, like
Right.
the mayor, I think, doesn't discuss much, maybe. And they can vote, the chair can vote.
Yep,
say
chair
it.
can vote.
Yeah.
Yep.
Has to vote.
Shall vote, shall, right.
Later on, it says we can't pass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I think the only way you can pass is if there's that conflict of interest. The right to vote of all members shall be subject to the provisions of Article 7E. That wasn't specific to just the chair or the vice chair, so Babbitt suggested moving that to the voting section, so I did that. So you will see that later. No additional changes in the first part of Article 7. And feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast. So the voting section, comments did get a little bit sloppy, so if you want to see those comments, you might have to go to your printed version. But basically, it was just deleting the word such in E2, little clarification of the language in there. Andy did want to have some further discussion on number 3. He didn't really say what that discussion was. So, if you guys have any additional thoughts on number 3, we can talk about it now, or we can just wait until next month.
I'm not gonna try and be able to, read someone's mind, but I think there was some talk before about this. I assume when Andy would like to have further discussion at the hearing regarding this section, I assume he means just the whatever finding of facts and what. I think there was some reference to that the last time we were here. What would that look like? Would we, one of us have to write something out, or would we, would it be part of if we're deviating from staff? Just what is necessary there? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I assume that's what he wanted to discuss. What would that look like in practice?
Yeah, it would make sense for the board to get some form of maybe like refresher on that at some regular interval, even like, because it gets lost probably every couple of years. But
Yeah.
just hey, if there is something, this is how you establish findings of facts. And it's in subdivision or in planning, it comes up quite a bit, but
Sure.
just as on the fly, it may be pretty messy from a board who doesn't know what it is.
Well, and the problem will be the consolidation of the opinions of the different board members into something that's coherent. So I think we have the obligation, though, if we're going to go to a conclusion that we feel is different than what the staff report has found, we do need to give a reason for it, though. And I really think it's proper for the public record to understand, for someone looking at this at a later date, what was the reason for the decision that was seemingly contrary to what the recommendation was. So I think we have to have something. I agree with Paul that the legal requirements that we may need to meet in order for that to be valid is something that I can't tell you right now. I'm certain that I can put my finger on and say that's good enough to meet the legal requirements. So I think that might be something that Paul's hit the nail on the head is, we might need to get some either training and or a recommendation of the minimums that we need to meet
Sure.
on that.
Okay.
So it'd be probably helpful so that when we are considering that at least if I'm, for myself anyway, I want to remind people, hey, we have to remember at that time, if we're going to go against a staff recommendation, we have to have a darn good reason and we need to be able to document it. So I think that's going to be a reminder that the chair is going to have to really make sure that the members understand. So, but again, there would be some help to understand the legal side of it to make sure that we don't getting ourselves into a jackpot by doing something that we probably shouldn't be. So
I agree with that. In a lot of cases, or at least I know the commissioners, when they deviate or make recommendations or speak on matters on the fly, there's a lawyer in the room that's advising them. And I mean, maybe that's you guys advising us when we come to something that's coherent. But there's definitely some legal ramifications that we don't understand.
And I think it might even be, if everyone knows what the requirements are, then we can actually search for those things prior to coming to the individually to the hearing and say, I'm taking this position, here's what it's based on. It would be of help maybe for the other members to understand what that is. So a little help on that might be great for us to be able to understand where our boundaries are as well.
I'm just going to throw something out there again. I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, and I don't know what the minimum requirements would be that Mark was suggesting, and I agree something like that. I agree to one that if we are going to deviate from the staff recommendation, we should provide some explanation, and two, we should make sure that explanation is satisfies the legal requirements. I suppose one way to ensure that we do that is when you send the agenda, and the staff recommendations just a little like, and if you're going to not follow staff recommendations, here's what you need. If it's a simple thing, I mean, if it's complicated, then maybe I don't know if we want that on, attached to every agenda, as a reminder, or maybe that's just part of some manual that we keep here, with we always have a copy of the zoning regulations or something here with the hearings. I mean, that's another way of doing it.
Well, usually when we have, if it's going to be something like that, might be coming along where you had legal counsel present.
Yeah.
Is there anything in here that we can request that, or you can?
I don't think it says specifically anywhere that, you can request legal counsel. Obviously, it's always available if requested prior to the hearing. On the fly is probably not going to work, but, we do the board trainings. We try and do them at least once a year, correct, Heather? Yeah, at least once a year. The other thing to keep in mind to make sure that you're compliant is to look back to the criteria that you're reviewing for. So if there's a certain criteria for a variance that you don't agree with staff because of X, Y, and Z, then you can go in and change those specific findings and say, well, because the applicant isn't meeting criteria 1 and 6, I'm going to recommend denial based on these findings, and then create your own findings for those facts.
We could have denied the project here today, just outright.
Sure.
I mean, of course, if it was the will of the board. And then what would we have done? We probably wouldn't have done a sufficient job. I think maybe when we're electing the board member, we should have a refresher, every year. Just, hey, this is, what you do.
Okay.
At minimum, there should be a discussion as part of the motion that's the opposite. We didn't have any discussion today, but we could have said, I support this and this I support because of the findings of fact. Well, at that same time, we could say, one individual could say, well, I don't agree with this findings of fact. And the question I have then is, do we have to vote on the new finding that I'm proposing? Or is it implied if you vote against it, like I suggest, that you also agree to my findings? That little kind of stuff,
Sure.
I think we could get a lot more, I guess, efficient with it, and clear.
Okay. And possibly one thing that could help is that when we have new members come on, like with planning board or whatnot, we sit down with them and do a one-on-one, more of that specialized training, and talking about those specific items that you're addressing now. So that could be helpful, and we can set up some sort of probably internal policy for new members. And
Maybe we could start, I mean, I think the board right now is at a loss for what the actual best way to do it would be. Maybe maybe you could just kind of give that knowledge to this board, maybe give a recommendation on how we should approach it, and then we can move forward, at least for 8 to 12 years with the knowledge being shared and passed along. So yeah, if you could, I mean, we could, or we could do a training. I know there's the annual training too.
yeah,
I think, it'd be good to just throw it on our agenda for the annual year, when we elect members to at least tell the new
sure.
president what they're expected to get the board to say.
And I will say too that, like, Jamie's been good. I've called her on quite a few hearings and said, hey, I don't get this. This seems backwards. Why is this going on? There's been a couple of times, even when we made a decision in this, under this board, that I later found out that I misunderstood or I didn't understand some of the information correctly, and it seemed plain as day to me that there was an issue and that we shouldn't pass this. But then I later find out that the county, at that time anyway, the county zoning regulations were so antiquated that there was actually no rules about some of the things that, and I thought that, well, that's just the craziest thing I've ever heard of in my life, but it was true. There was no real recourse, and there's nothing that we could really regulate there. We denied a variance at one point because of that. So I just know from background that these situations have happened, and even on those cases when those did happen and the variance was denied, there was a situation where there wasn't really a good adequate explanation given to the folks in the public that were asking for it. So I think if we're going to do it, we have to take it pretty seriously. And I know that there's been quite a few times where I've called Jamie or other staffers and said, hey, I'm inclined to deny this because of the following. Can you please explain to me why the heck are you guys saying this is okay? Because it seems crazy to me that you would say that this is an approvable item. And the explanation a lot of times was so informing to me that I realized that I, not necessarily that it wasn't maybe a good thing to try to change it, but on the other hand, the regulations and the way it's set up, we have no basis to do it. And it's confounding sometimes to me because it goes against common sense and logic. But if that is the law and that is what is in front of us, we have to follow that. We can't make up our own stuff as we go. So I just know that's happened in the past. So, I mean, you agree?
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
So I just don't want to get us in that situation.
Sure.
If we possibly can.
Sure. And I can look and do a little more research maybe on the findings section and see if I can add anything to it before next meeting too.
I will say though, too, on a couple of those that we did have, we went ahead and rectified those later on, but it took a couple of hearings to get them handled. But that's a lot of extra work for staff and everybody else too. So,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing. So it sounds like, just make sure we're all on the same page. Sounds like we support this language in the bylaws and we won't add anything to the bylaws, but we want some other process. I don't think we're going to put the process in the bylaws, but we want some bylaws as you've drafted them, and then we'll have some other process. Just make sure we're all.
yeah, I think that the request for us to provide the alternative findings of fact is reasonable. It needs to really happen. So how we get there is kind of up to us. So we have to take it, seriously and make sure we come prepared to, if we're going to look at a notion to deny a recommended approval or the like. Okay.
Okay.
Keep moving.
Okay.
All right.
Andy had a question on the conflict of interest that says a conflict of interest exists when a member of the board has an immediate family member with a financial or property interest in a matter under consideration by the board. His question was that if a board member has a client on another project that is of the same as the applicant making the request, does that constitute a conflict? So I said possibly, but I think we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So I don't think what I think he's getting at is that one project can influence the other, I think is what he's getting at. But I'm not really sure. So again, we can address that when Andy's here, hopefully next time.
Paul, do you have anything on that you're concerned about?
No, I don't. I think it's possibly is the right answer. I mean, it's difficult. There's only so many firms like ours, I guess. And
Yeah.
I try not to vote on things that we've surveyed, even though that goes through a different department and I don't see it. But there's potentially a perceived conflict, which I think is a conflict, I guess. So it can be.
Yeah. I think if it's something that you guys surveyed X number of years ago and now it's coming back before you for something, I don't necessarily see that as a conflict of interest. But if it's an active project in your office, then yeah, I can
Right,
see
it's
it.
tough because we don't always see the agenda and then,
Right.
and then I say I'm coming and
Yep. Yep.
so I think I got to come either way now.
Ooh, I like it. Next comment was regarding uh, let's see. If somebody is in conflict of interest and they're disqualified from voting, does that mean that they have to leave the room? No, that doesn't mean they have to leave the room. They're still a member of the public. They can comment as the public. They just can't partake in the board discussion and voting.
And is that on all items or is that just on just that item?
Just that item. Yep. So Babbitt was unclear in the next section, what is meant by currently before? Does this mean that the current meeting, or does it also include matters that are still in the pipe, such as when staff are discussing the need for a variance for a potential applicant? I thought that was covered up above in what would be G1C. Basically, that it's that conflict of interest again. So I just suggested striking that. Kind of that same topic we just talked about. No additional changes in this first section of Article 8. Suggested a change to the language under new business regarding the materials mailed or emailed to board members. I suggested just striking that, so it would now read, only those items included on the agenda may be acted upon at the particular meeting. I mean, if you're acting on an item, we're sending you information. So I think that's okay unless
Yeah,
we
I
need
think it's
further-
probably fine, because sometimes we get last minute stuff too at the meeting.
Yeah.
That's pretty common practice, so
Yeah,
I think that's fine.
okay. Nothing in this first part of Article 9. The Babbitt had a comment regarding reasonable time limits. So I made a change in this next section. And it was the conflict between board and chair. So I changed that to be the chair that sets the limit rather than the board. So section L shall identify that the absent members and the presence of any alternate serving on the board and shall give the applicant the opportunity to file an objection for the record. If such objection is made, the public hearing shall be conducted and the objection shall thereafter be referred to the county attorney by staff. So I just gave a for instance here, if the applicant believes there was a conflict of interest, he could object to the member sitting as a voting member. The hearing would still continue as far as I see it. However, it would be referred to the county attorney after the meeting. I don't know if that's the best procedure. Kind of seems backwards to me, but that's how this is taken from the current bylaws that we have. So I'm more than happy to entertain suggestions for changes.
I mean, it sounds like this would also cover if there was a conflict and an alternate were seated and you moved
Yes.
the alternate and someone said, I don't want the alternate.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the only thing I thought of on this one was, and I think it's clear but to a certain extent, but if the chair is the person that they're objecting to, or if the chair has an issue with regard to a conflict, would it be proper then just to exclude them completely? Because if they're, excuse me, running the meeting or whatever, is that going to be considered undue influence?
I would see that the chair could still run the meeting. They would just have to recuse themselves from that specific topic, and then the vice chair would likely step in as the chair. And
Okay, I think that's, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that, we can leave that up to the board members at that time to
yeah,
work that out. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
okay. So are we okay with that then? How it is? Good. Okay. Just revised Article 10 regarding communications. So it will now read personal communications of members. Any individual member shall not speak on behalf of the board or sign written communication to others using the board name unless approved by all members. So there we just added speak on behalf of the board. Next section down. It was previous various issues affecting the community that was in there. Again, this was pulled from planning board suggested language, so it made sense for planning board, but I agree it does not make sense for this board. So I changed that to issues that are before the board. Good. Okay. Nothing there. Nothing there. Getting into findings. Babbitt had another good recommendation about conditions or limits when variances are approved. So the subject to staff's recommended conditions. So I did add an entire section that I'll show you next based on conditions, and I pulled that language directly from the zoning document. So I'll show you that, and then again, if the board vote deviates from the recommendation of staff, the board shall include a concise statement of the reason for their vote. So again, you obviously can talk about it, so it's going to be your board decision. And that was also a comment from Andy as well. And then appeals, I changed that language just a little, as you can see on the screen, just to read a little bit clearer. And then this section here, that is that new conditions section. So basically, if you do a condition, it has to be based on these factors. Any thoughts or comments on those? Hoping not, because we pulled it right from the zoning, so. Under Article, let's see, that's 13. We changed that to be the chair. So the chair may appoint board members to special committees for purposes and terms as he or she sees fit. So I think that makes more sense. And then no other additional changes in that section. And then regarding amendments, we had governing bodies that can approve the final draft. It should be commissioners. So we made that change. And that was it. So Mark, as I see it, we have adding the word zoning to Article 4A5, and then if the board can get comments back to me regarding Article 5C2, which was the term limits. That would be great. And then I'll revise the definition of chair and vice chair. So those were the three areas that I noted that we needed further follow-up on.
Everybody happy with that?
When's it to be effective?
Well, I think what we want to talk about now is when do we want to try and vote at this on the next meeting, and what is a reasonable time frame, Jamie, in your opinion, to get these changes cleaned up and on a document and out to the board members?
So our normal board hearing date for June will be June 20th. Our mail date is June 13th.
So we don't
so-
have a meeting in May?
no May meeting, excuse me, thank you. So if I can have comments by May 16th, let's say, gives you basically a month.
A month away. Does that seem reasonable to everyone? Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good. That'd be great.
all right.
And then next time we meet in June, then we should be able to make a recommendation and move forward with this.
Yep.
Seem reasonable?
Totally.
Yeah, Lauren's just reminding me. For June, we do have an item coming up. It's going to be for temp right. So Jackson's involved with that project as well as PCI, so Andy. So it's likely that they'll be recusing themselves, I would imagine,
Yep.
from that vote. So just to let the rest of you know that we'll need you
So
here.
that's the chair and the vice chair, I believe. So
Yep.
The next member in line can.
Sit in.
Good luck on that project.
Yeah.
Hey now. Okay, and that's all I think I have.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks so much for
Yep.
taking care of this.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really
So
appreciate
now
it.
I can go all the way back to old business. We got nothing today?
Nothing.
Okay, no new business either?
Nope.
Okay, staff announcements. Can't hardly talk. I guess we'll be adjourned then. Thanks, you
All
guys.
right.
Appreciate your help.
Thanks, you guys.